Imagine a room where absolutely every physical process has stopped moving. The dust motes hang frozen in midair. A spilled cup of coffee is suspended mid-splash. Nothing changes. Looking at a frozen scene like this, it is incredibly natural to assume that somewhere in the background a cosmic clock is still ticking. We intuitively picture time as an invisible, flowing river that keeps moving forward, regardless of what is happening inside the room. But according to a framework in physics known as the Relational Action Framework, or RAF, that intuition is exactly backward. There is no background ticking. A single isolated event doesn't create time, and a completely random sequence of changes doesn't create time either. Without a repeating rhythm, change is just noise. Time is not a master dimension built into the early universe. It is a localized phenomenon, and it has to be actively generated. If time isn't a flowing river, we have to ask what mechanical ingredients are actually required to build it out of pure chaos. First is stable closure, a distinct boundary holding its shape against noise. Second is a repeatable update, pulsing while remaining recognizably itself. Third is memory. You must retain a persistent trace of the prior state to compare now with before. When you combine those three mechanics, a strict definition emerges. Time is exactly this, the countable recurrence inside a persistent closure. This forces us to rethink how we look at everyday timekeeping. Whether observing a swinging pendulum, a vibrating quartz crystal, or a planetary orbit, none measure an invisible river. What a clock actually does is manufacture a highly reliable repeating pattern. It physically forces a rhythm out of mechanical tension. That mechanism perfectly executes the recipe we just built. The metal gears maintain a stable closure. They force a repeatable update with every tick, and the physical arrangement of the teeth provides the memory of the prior state. We do not use clocks to track an abstract dimension. We use the tangible rhythms created by clocks as a stable baseline to compare against all the other, more chaotic changes happening in the universe. This animated diagram shows a photon propagating across space, which allows us to test this framework at the quantum scale. Notice that the photon is a straight vector, completely lacking any internal loops, pulses, or repeating patterns. Because a photon simply propagates without an internal repeating rhythm or a memory trace, it cannot generate time. From its own perspective, a journey across the universe takes 0 seconds. We can also stress test this at the macro scale by looking at extreme gravity and time dilation. This diagram compares a pulsing closure in empty space with one place near a massive, dense sphere. A massive object like a black hole doesn't bend time. Instead, extreme gravitational load changes the local environment, physically slowing down the internal update cycle of rhythmic closures. From a light beam to a collapsing star, the rule holds. Time dictates itself strictly by a system's physical ability to maintain a rhythm under stress. This framework applies just as cleanly to biology. The human brain operates as a localized rhythm comparison machine. This chart visualizes the specific nested recurrences your body is constantly tracking. Heartbeats, breathing, neural oscillations, and circadian rhythms stack together into a combined waveform. The brain weighs these overlapping patterns to generate your feeling of time. You can observe this mechanism optimized during a psychological flow state. When athletes or artists become intensely focused on a single task, they frequently lose all track of time. Mechanically, what happens in a flow state is that your internal bodily rhythms and the external patterns of the task perfectly lock together. The recurrent structure aligns, friction drops, and your perception of time warps. Your perception of time is entirely active. You are never passively watching an internal clock. Your consciousness is constantly weighing and generating time through biological rhythms. This leads to a final biological consequence. We usually assume that aging is the passive passage of years wearing a body down. Under the RAF model, aging is the slow, inevitable loss of a biological system's ability to maintain a clean rhythmic closure. As you get older, your physical cycles become noisier, cellular updates get frustrated, the rhythms become less coherent, and that accumulated static leads to systemic breakdown. Which brings us to the tightest definition of what this phenomenon actually is. Time is explicitly the memory of repeatable closure. You do not float through a pre-existing dimension of time. You and every rhythmic system in the cosmos actively generate it.